The sheriff laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite grin. He laughed so hard he had to lean on his cruiser for balance. And poor Karen, standing there in her neon flip-flops, was demanding that he arrest me for trespassing on my own cabin. What she didn't know, what no one expected, was that I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the entire shoreline she was screaming about. Akiti. The conflict begins. It was one of those mornings when the lake looked like glass, so still it felt like I was living at the edge of heaven. Coffee in hand, just about to sit down on the porch when tires screeched. And then came that voice. Karen Johnson, HOA president, blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and that damn clipboard she carried like a royal scepter. She stormed across my dock, pointing at everything: my cooler, my fishing rods, even the hammock strung between two trees. Violation, violation, violation. She rattled off like a cop writing tickets. I just sipped my coffee. Karen, this isn't HOA land. This is my cabin. Always has been. But she wasn't hearing it. She puffed up, shrieked about community property, and before I could finish my coffee, she was on the phone dialing 911, yelling so loud you'd think she was calling in an airstrike. Minutes later, the sheriff pulled up, the same guy who'd fished with me at this very cabin last week. He took one look at Karen stomping around in her neon flip-flops. 3 HOA disciples lined up behind her with clipboards like backup dancers, and you could see the smile tugging at his mouth. He let her rant. For 3 minutes, she threatened fines, citations, even said she'd call the governor. Finally, he cleared his throat and asked, "Karen, you called me out here because he's sitting on his porch." Her face turned red. She jabbed a finger at me. "He's squatting on HOA land. Arrest him." And that's when the sheriff laughed. "Karen, you just asked me to arrest the man who owns half the lake." The silence, delicious. Karen froze. Her disciples stared at their clipboards like maybe the answers were hidden in the margins. And a few neighbors on the road started chuckling. But Karen, she doubled down. She always doubled down. Akiti 2. Escalation and doubt. The next morning, I woke to find her SUV parked sideways across my driveway. Signs plastered on the windows. HOA property violation. Do not move. And she strutted out from behind a hedge like a general after victory. "Karen, you're blocking my truck," I said. She smirked. "Community law supersedes state law." I nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Right on cue, the sheriff rolled up again. His face when he saw her SUV, priceless, part disbelief, part glee. And when he asked her to move it, she refused, insisting it was a lawful vehicle impound. A delivery truck swerved, clipped her side mirror clean off, sent it spinning across my yard. The sheriff bent over laughing. Karen wailed it was my fault, called it evidence. Every stunt, every fake violation, every citation scribbled on her clipboard. It all backfired, but she wouldn't stop. Next came her so-called HOA Lake Festival. She plastered flyers everywhere, barbecue, live music, boat rides right on my property. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the madness unfold. Tents and coolers, cheap banners strung between my trees, her SUV blasting bad country music. Neighbors showed up out of curiosity. Karen pranced around with a neon visor and whistle, shouting that squatters will not interfere. It spiraled fast. The food delivery never came, so she grilled half-frozen hot dogs, smoke choking the crowd. The live band was her cousin strumming an out-of-tune guitar. One of the rowboats tipped, dumping kids into the lake. And when she tried to salvage the day with fireworks, one shot sideways, straight into the barbecue pit. Flames whooshed up. People screamed. Another rocket zipped under her SUV canopy. Sparks everywhere. By the time the fire department showed up, Karen was covered in soot. Visor melted half off, shrieking that I had sabotaged her event. The sheriff muttered it was the best free comedy show he'd seen in years. But that night, sitting on my porch, staring at the charred grass, doubt crept in. Was I the fool for staying? My family's cabin had become a circus. Neighbors whispered. I felt like selling, walking away, sparing myself the humiliation. I almost gave up. Then I remembered my dad's words. Land isn't power. Son, it's responsibility. That's when I decided I wasn't backing down. Act 3. The The climax. Karen's last act of desperation. The Lake Liberation March. She paraded down the road with a ragtag marching band of teenagers blaring off-key patriotic songs. Disciples carried clipboards like holy tablets. Karen wore a glitter sash reading HOA President, bullhorn in hand, shouting that they were reclaiming the shoreline. They stormed my yard, tried to chain off my driveway, even trapped her own SUV in the process. Neighbors filmed, laughing. She promised them food, but all she had were soggy sandwiches and warm soda. Morale collapsed. Then she made her boldest move, marching to my cabin door with 2 loyal disciples. She rattled the knob, shouted into her bullhorn, 30 seconds or we force entry. The sheriff was already there, arms crossed. Karen, one more move and you're spending the night in a holding cell. She spun on him, screaming about corruption, then set up a folding chair like it was a judge's bench, ordered me to sit for her tribunal. She read off violations, my hammock, my fishing rods, the fireworks fiasco, while her disciples nodded solemnly. Neighbors laughed openly, phones raised, and then it all unraveled. One disciple snapped. She lied to us. The HOA has no jurisdiction over his land. The gasps. Karen's face went scarlet. She shrieked, stomped, demanded a vote on my lawn. Clipboards raised in the air. She declared victory, announced my eviction. The sheriff actually doubled over laughing. Karen, your pretend votes don't override state law. She lost it screaming, stomping like a child. And that's when fate delivered the perfect ending. The cheap banner she'd strung overhead came loose, dropped right onto her, tangled in fabric. Bullhorn muffled, she flailed on the grass while the crowd roared with laughter. I stepped forward, finally, folder in hand. The sheriff read it aloud. Official deed, on record with the county proving not just my cabin, but the entire shoreline belonged to me. Karen, the sheriff said, grinning, you've spent weeks calling me to arrest the man who owns the whole shore. The crowd erupted. Phones filmed every second. Karen stood frozen, glitter, sash crooked, bullhorn dangling. Her disciples melted into the crowd, embarrassed, and she stomped off to her soot-stained SUV, shouting about conspiracies. That was her downfall. Final beat. I didn't cheer, didn't gloat. I just stood on the porch with my coffee, watching the lake settle calm again. Because the lesson was clear. Bullies only win if you let them convince you they have power they never truly had.